Today's show is sponsored by JumpCloud. JumpCloud offers a cloud directory platform that gives users a single identity for their email, apps, networks, and even their work devices, whether they're Mac, Windows, or Linux. JumpCloud gives IT admins a single pane of glass to configure and secure those devices, set policies for MFA, full disk encryption, screensaver, and much more. With JumpCloud, remote onboarding and offboarding goes from hours to under 5 minutes. JumpCloud puts zero trust security within the reach of organizations of any size. JumpCloud reimagines the relationship between the user identity, their work device, and their access to resources. Access is securely granted based on trusted identity, trusted device, and trusted network. So if you're looking for a directory that supports heterogeneous OSs, or you just need SSO, MDM, LDAP, MFA, or all of the above, JumpCloud will make your job easier. Try it out for yourself at jumpcloud.com. That's jumpcloud.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. A Sunday Perspectives show on the, second day of spring, March 20th. Sometimes March 21st is considered the first day of spring. So hope everybody is starting to enjoy the spring. Hope the weather's getting a little better wherever you live around the world. And today we're going to talk about, we're coming up on around kind of give or take the first year anniversary of dealing with this pandemic. I know some parts of the world got started a little bit earlier, unfortunately, but, we're kind of dealing with around the 1 year anniversary. And the good news is we're starting to see, more and more things evolve, right? The vaccinations are starting to roll out more and more, not necessarily evenly around the world, unfortunately, but we're starting to see the science take over. We're seeing vaccinations kicking in different places. And hopefully, assuming that we kind of get our act together and we get enough people vaccinated or to some level of herd immunity or whatever that might be, maybe by this fall, we're kind of back to normal. And the question becomes, what does normal mean? And so, I've been trying to think about this in the perspective of, we occasionally go through these sort of traumatic things as either an individual country or global community and so forth, whether it's, an economic crisis or, a war or, in this case, the pandemic or something else. And, a lot of times things change coming out of that. And so, I kind of wanted to take today's show, since we're around the roughly 1 year anniversary, and sort of look at, where are we with the pandemic in terms of what's changed? What do we sort of know that's changed? What do we think might change back to sort of the previous normal? And maybe what are some of the new normals that we're going to see going forward? So we're going to kind of dive into that as sort of how will COVID change the tech industry? How has it changed the tech industry? And, what sort of thinking might we have going forward? So we're going to get to that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by O'Reilly. O'Reilly is known for its animal books, which have helped tech professionals stay ahead for over 40 years. Today, its online learning platform at O'Reilly.com takes learning tech to the next level. Sure, your teams get access to thousands of books and videos, but there's also interactive learning, which is where you can get hands-on with tech like Kubernetes, Python, Docker, Java, and much more in live dev environments. So they learn by doing, not just reading. With live online sessions, your teams learn from the biggest brains in AI, software architecture, cloud, data, programming, and more. They can even prep for tech certification exams with official materials and interactive practice tests. And then there's O'Reilly Answers. You just ask the search engine any tech question, and it takes you right to the best answers from O'Reilly's renowned books. It's why 66% of all Fortune 100 companies give their teams O'Reilly online learning. Get a demo today at O'Reilly.com. That's O'Reilly.com. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and traces from technologies like Istio, AppMesh, and Envoy. Plus, Datadog's Service Map automatically plots out the dependencies in your microservices architectures for seamless, context-rich troubleshooting. With rich visualizations, algorithmic alerting, and more than 250 vendor-supported integrations, Datadog allows you to monitor your distributed applications in real time. Start a free 14-day trial today by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast, and Datadog will send you a great free t-shirt. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back, and hopefully everybody is doing well. Again, this Sunday Perspective show, kind of thinking about, where are we with the evolution with this pandemic in terms of the tech industry, in terms of how it's going to affect the tech industry, how it's going to affect cloud usage and so forth. And so, by no means have we ever proven ourselves to be world-class prognosticators. I think we do a decent job of kind of, looking ahead of what might happen, in the future. But, don't take this by any means as, great financial advice or something you should, bet your career on. But I've been thinking about, what have we learned over the last year? What's distinctly changed? And, what's sort of 50-50 on might change back or might change to something in the future. So I thought I would take that and sort of frame it up the way we do on the Sunday Perspective show as, kind of what do we know? What do we maybe know? And then, what's sort of open-ended in the future. And I tried to break this into kind of 4 sections. We're going to break this into kind of how we work and how we collaborate. The adoption of public cloud as a result of us not necessarily being in our offices as much and maybe necessarily not being in our data centers as much. We're going to talk a little bit about what the cloud providers did or didn't do throughout this pandemic, and then just a little bit of maybe what's next. What's the next big thing? So I'm going to kind of frame it into those 4 buckets and kind of see where this goes. So I'm going to start with remote work and collaboration, because I think probably more than anything, the most immediate impact that we saw from COVID was obviously the vast majority of us, and not everybody, but a lot of people in the tech industry started working from home or working remote, if you will. I shouldn't necessarily just classify that as working from home, because a lot of times people picked up and left where they were working because they now had an opportunity to not go into the office. So we saw some people being transient in terms of where they lived. They were taking advantage of living in new locations because it was cheaper, or this was an opportunity. Their company was now allowing them to not be forced to work in the office. They made some policies that said, hey, you can work remotely. And so, we did see some amount of moving around places like Texas and Florida. Sometimes people moved for tax reasons. Sometimes they moved for weather reasons. Sometimes they moved for family reasons. So we saw, the biggest thing that we immediately saw and continue to see is this kind of evolution of what remote work means. And for some people, kind of full-time remote work has been a full-time thing. They've done it for a very long time. I think what we're going to see and what we've seen over the last year or so is a couple of shifts, right? One, the companies who have always been sort of 100% remote, if you will, are talking more and more about what they do well. We've seen people like HashiCorp just recently published kind of their internal culture document, which I thought was interesting. I'll put that in the show notes. HashiCorp's always talked about being a kind of a fully embracing remote work kind of company. But we've also seen companies like Google and Amazon and others who have notoriously been, very office bound in terms of where they wanted people to work, whether that was in Silicon Valley or whether it was in Seattle or wherever it might be. And we've seen more and more. We've seen them, begin to do a couple of things. In some cases, they have been actively recruiting people that don't live in those areas for new roles. So we've seen a huge uptick in people, beginning to switch jobs or considering, hey, that's a company I could work for, but I never could work for them in the past. Them starting to become a little more flexible and lax in terms of, how dependent that they needed people to be of being in the office. Now, the interesting thing about that is in a lot of cases, it's not clear whether that will be a permanent policy. So in the case of like Google just announced that they are planning to spend about $7 billion in 2021, maybe 2021, 2022 in new office space. But that office space isn't necessarily all in California. Right? We saw some in Texas. We saw some in North Carolina. We're seeing some in other places. So there is some adoption of, hey, we need to spread out and meet people where they are. Some of that may just be, again, for tax reasons, and we see all sorts of corporate things happening. But it's going to be very interesting to watch and see how well people continue to adapt to this remote idea. Is it, remote forever? Which, for a lot of people, that's fine. There's lots of family dynamics that play into that. For some people, it creates a lot of uncertainty in terms of, I just took a job. I've never seen any or met any of my coworkers, and I'm not sure if I have to go back in the office. And I'm not sure if this job that I took is sort of tied to the remoteness, but working for this company, which may have, multiple career paths, is that going to be flexible as well? Like, or was it only this job that's going to be flexible for the remoteness, but for, the next thing like come along in 22 or 23 or 24 or whenever, is that going to be tied back to a physical location, right? So will we see sort of a boomerang thing happen in 2022 or 23 or 24, where people are having to move back to California, move back to Seattle, move back to Boston, or these very sort of high rent districts, if you will, and big concentration areas, or do we continue to see the proliferation of people being spread out, whether that's in the States or around the world in other locations? So that's going to be a really big, interesting thing. The second thing is around collaboration, right? I sort of look at it as we have the foundational pieces in place in terms of tools to be able to do remote work. So, GitHub and Zoom and Slack and Jira and public cloud. So, all the fundamental things are in place for people to work remotely, but they're not really, optimized or designed to be great at collaboration, right? They're okay, right? Things like Slack are okay at collaboration, but they're still kind of time bound, right? If you miss, a thread and, you're not on the best plan, you may not be able to go back and look at it. You may have too many threads going on. So there's a lot of still time zone things that are going on. We talked a few weeks ago to some folks like at Linear B who are trying to build in stuff like, what's the mental state of people working on projects, right? Like, are they slowed down their work? Have they accelerated their work, right? There's not really a lot of things yet built in to take into consideration that we have remote teams, right? We have tools, but they're not necessarily designed, to think about holistically, what is it like to have remote teams? They're just kind of online tools, if you will. So it'll be very interesting to see if we start to see a big change in those kind of core foundational tools, if we start to see people kind of breaking down after a year plus of, working remote, not being around people, working on odd hours, having to, manage all the family life changes, having to deal with, just the stress and sort of, ongoing thing of having ring lights in your face all the time or always being on video. So, it'll be interesting to watch kind of throughout the rest of this year. People were real resilient to get through the first year. Sometimes, after maybe they let their guard down, they go, oh, the vaccinations are out there. We start to see some challenges there. So that'll be really interesting to watch is, do the tools evolve to become robust for remote workers, or, do remote workers go back to being sort of second-class citizens and only the people on a video call and sort of not into the hallway conversation and all that kind of stuff? And the third thing I wanted to talk about in terms of this was kind of events. For some people in the industry, events are kind of the lifeblood, right? They get a chance to not only showcase their knowledge, they're there gaining knowledge. They're, part of, companies that are, interacting and doing commerce and so forth. But also for a lot of people, certain events are their place to network, their place to learn. And, it's been harder and harder to network with people because you don't see them. You don't see them in the bar. You kind of don't get that tip about a new job. You don't kind of hear about a trend that might be below the radar of the media and stuff. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, we saw, about 5X or 10X at a lot of events in terms of the numbers of signups. So if you said, hey, I went to KubeCon or I went to AWS reInvent or whatever, the numbers for the event are huge. But it was kind of questionable as to whether or not those events had much impact in the last year. Lots of announcements were made, as they always are. Lots of keynotes and videos were made. But did anybody really go back and watch those things? Did they ever sit down and listen to them? How much time was really spent really consuming it? Because we were overwhelmed. We were doing meetings all the time and dealing with just the transitions with kids and family and all that stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how events really recover. In some cases, we're starting to see talked about in the fall of 2021. Summer's still online, so it may be 2022, and who knows? Who knows? Lots of people are talking about not doing as much business travel. Much more consumer travel than business travel. So that's going to be a huge, huge impact, and I think something we're going to have to take into consideration. Just kind of finding that balance between people being effective at their jobs and their mental health, and kind of their comfort level of being in places that maybe still aren't vaccinated very well, aren't very well managed in terms of just kind of overall health and safety. All right. So that kind of, a lot of thoughts there around, remote work and collaboration, which I think for a lot of people, because it impacts them directly on a daily basis and they can most relate to it, probably top of mind in terms of what COVID did to affect you this last year. Let's talk a little bit about usage and adoption and so forth. So, we did see, adoption of the public cloud. Obviously, as people weren't going into their offices, it was a little harder to grow new projects. Like you couldn't go in and rack and stack new servers in your data center. In some cases, maybe it wasn't as easy to get something out of a colo or something like that. So, we saw some dynamics change in terms of, how much can we grow a project? Can we even get equipment, right? We had some supply chain challenges and so forth. And so there was some growth of the public cloud, right? There was obviously a lot of adoption of SaaS types of things. Obviously, we saw stuff like Zoom and other collaboration tools and lots of SaaS things sort of take off. When we looked at the overall growth of the public cloud, so we looked at the big 3-4 companies, yes, they grew, but not at astronomical numbers, right? Like not compared to, when we talked about the industry, just the kind of the global economy as a whole, the things that did really well, which you would have thought technology would have done, huge. Cloud usage wasn't massive numbers, right? There was a few outliers, a Zoom or certain things and so forth. But, for example, you talk about like a FedEx or a UPS, like they were having, Christmas type of delivery every single day, right? We had, certain things that just kind of blew up. The cloud grew, but it didn't grow at a massive rate. So, to me, that says, yes, there was a certain amount of new spend pushed into the cloud. There were some new projects taken on when there was opportunity, but this wasn't like this event that took the 70%, 80%, 90% of on-prem applications and just magically push them all to the cloud, right? Now, what we might see, and this is what I think is going to be interesting, is the sort of usage of the public cloud, even for non-existing applications, then going to drag more quickly the stuff that was in your data centers into the public cloud. Right, sort of the just lift and shift type of use cases, or basic refactoring, basic replatforming going to happen, and that may happen not necessarily because it was the best technical thing, but because sometimes we just see, the financial thinking within companies is let's begin to do things as consistent as possible, even if not all of it is optimized as possible, right? So they want to get out of data centers, so they want to get out of long-term contracts, so they want to get out of things that aren't as flexible as they may need in the future. So I think that's going to be a big, interesting thing. I think the second thing was, I was sort of expecting we were going to see, unfortunately, a lot of layoffs and a lot of companies go bankrupt. We didn't necessarily see that, which obviously is a good thing. You never want to see sort of bad things happen to people. But we also didn't see, massive acquisitions either. I mean, we saw some acquisitions, security company here, security company there, a network company here or there, but we didn't see massive consolidations, which is sort of unusual. I think a lot of people took a wait and see attitude. Budgets kind of got, frozen early on. People started to make some adaptations. They unfroze a little bit the second half of the year, and we'll see how 2021 shakes out. But I think, kind of what's going to happen, how fast it'll accelerate. I know people like Satya Nadella said, hey, we saw 2 years of adoption happen in 2 months. That probably happened during May and April, but March and April of last year, but we didn't see that necessarily happen throughout the whole year, right? Like once we sort of realize what this new pandemic-y state got to, and I think we'll see that as well. So what is going to be interesting is, do we begin to see these more agile approaches become the normal, right? Because I think as we look at the world, unfortunately, the world is not becoming any more stable. We're seeing a lot of polarization. We're seeing some wild fluctuations that swing with political, events that happen every 2 years or 1 year or 4 years, whatever the election cycles might be. So I'm wondering if we will see a bigger push to say, hey, these more rapidly evolving environments have to become the new normal. They can't just become the thing for a center of excellence. They can't just become the thing for the DevOps team. We have to be, as a company, thinking more and more, and that extends into our technology. So that'll be kind of an interesting other thing to be watching for the next couple of years. The third bucket I want to look at is, why didn't the cloud providers do more? And this is something I've been sort of thinking about. We have a situation in which the three big cloud providers, if you will, so Amazon, Google, Microsoft, in whatever order, have massive amounts of cash, right? And, they're all somewhat tied up in other businesses as well. But, Microsoft's got $137 billion in cash. Google's got $112 billion. Amazon's got $50 billion, and those numbers fluctuate. But they have massive amounts of money, massive war chests to go make big moves. And obviously, when the market's in sort of volatile times, those are oftentimes the times when you make big moves, right? Money is really cheap these days to borrow if you want to. These businesses are all throwing off a ton of cash. I was really surprised to not see more big moves, right? We didn't see any massive acquisitions from any of the big three cloud providers, whether that was in the services side of the business, whether that was in, vendor acquisitions. Obviously, we saw Salesforce acquire Slack, but that doesn't really massively reshape the industry. So I was very, very surprised that didn't happen. I was also very surprised that we didn't see anybody try and initiate a price war or anything that would, really kind of change the dynamics of the market. They all seem to be, just kind of fighting, competing with each other as if they're all, of equals to a certain extent. Obviously, there's nuances between them, but we didn't see anybody make a really radical step in one way or the other to try and change the dynamics of the game. And so I was kind of surprised at that. But we did, on the other hand, we did begin to see, some more long-term ELAs and big name ELAs from enterprise companies announced. So maybe that's the sort of change that comes out of this is, they're trying to, tie them into these longer-term contracts, which is kind of weird to, hear about 5-year and 10-year contracts for, sort of the on-demand services. But it's kind of the nature of what we have. But I was really sort of surprised that we didn't see more from the cloud providers looking at this, or even just, massive CapEx type of things, use debt or just cheap financing to expand out of that. We saw some from Amazon, but nothing from everybody else. So very surprised about that. The last bucket I'm going to kind of throw out, and this will be the last thing we'll wrap up with, was kind of this: where's the next big thing, right? And I throw this out because, as I think back about, the 2006, 7, and 8 timeframe. So 2006 and 7, you had the iPhone launch, so sort of the smartphone, just change in how people interact with the internet, interact with data, interact with mobility happened 2006, 2007, or 2007. 2006 to 2008 was when we first started even beginning to hear about AWS, right? Things like S3 and EC2 and so forth. And then you had the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. And, we saw this massive kind of change and innovation explosion that happened because of, the public cloud, change in how we do mobile devices, and then just this kind of reckoning of, okay, we got to think about finances differently. And it impacted a lot of different parts of the industry. And we haven't really seen that yet, right? There wasn't anything necessarily radically changing stuff in, say, 2018 or 19. Obviously, we've seen stuff like AI and ML start to take off, but those are sort of just evolving areas of the technology spectrum. And then 2020 comes along, and granted, 2020 was kind of a crash, kind of not a crash. I mean, it was, it's a different type of thing. It was this sort of slow-moving, painful thing, a little different than the crash of 2008. But I'm wondering, what is that next big thing, right? Like, what is the next, I don't want to say like, let's not waste a crisis, but like, it just doesn't feel like we have the same alignment we had before, where there was this percolating innovation explosion waiting to happen. And then you had this economic event that happened that drove a lot of stuff. So yes, the joke is floating around is, who drives your digital transformation? Is it your CEO, your CIO, your CTO, or was it COVID? I went into this show thinking, well, maybe COVID really is your digital transformation officer. But, COVID, looking back, I don't know that it's done as much to change things as we thought they did. I'd love to get some people's perspective on what are the things that we're sort of blind to, or we're not seeing as much. But we saw some changes. Obviously, we saw the stock market, reward the tech companies really, really well for a while. It's kind of flattened out. But the more I think about it, the COVID piece had more change on people than it did technology, and to a certain extent spending. I think what's going to be really interesting to watch, and something we'll keep an eye on for the next couple of years of the show, is just what are going to be the second and third order effects into 2022, into 23, into 24? And, did COVID really change the way that we think about collaborating, the way that we consume applications, where we consume applications, or maybe some next big thing that just didn't jump off the page? And, you would have expected to start to see some of those things by now. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I hope everybody, as always, enjoyed today's Sunday's Perspective. We will be back on Wednesday with show number 500. We're really excited about the 500th show. And thank you to everybody who's listened to any, all, or part of the shows over the last 10 plus years. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for everybody for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for rating the show on Apple Podcasts and all the other places you get it every week. And with that, we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.